Hello, class. Today we are talking about Unit 1, Lesson 4, integers and absolute value. And in order to talk about those two things, we need to know what they are. An integer is a positive or negative whole number, including 0. So if it's only positive and negative whole numbers, that means no decimals and no fractions. So we're only going to talk about numbers that have no decimals and no fractions on them. Absolute value, the distance between that number and 0. So the absolute value is asking you how far a number is from 0. So absolute values will always be positive. You can make those notes for yourself if you notice that they aren't on the ones that you have copies of. Plot the integers and their additive inverse. Now, opposite would be like the 6th grade word where we talk about the opposite of a number. So for example, -4 and +4 are opposites. But when we get to 7th grade, we start using the term that's more algebraic, which is additive inverse. So we can say they are opposites, but the new term that we're going to use is additive inverse. So whether you're taking a standardized test or you're looking in a textbook, as you move on, you probably won't hear the word opposites used very often anymore. The next one on there, B, the number 6. So if you have 6, the additive inverse of 6 is -6. The next number on there, C, is 0. And 0 is its own additive inverse. It doesn't have an opposite. And so we could just, okay, 0. Good for that one. Yay, 0. And last but not least on the list was D, -1. So if we have -1, the additive inverse is +1. So absolute value, distance from 0, was the term that we have on here that may or may not be new. You've probably heard it before. But what is the absolute value symbol? So the absolute value symbol are these two vertical bars. So this reads out loud, what is the absolute value of -7? How far is -7 from 0? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units away from 0. So it's worth +7. Distance is always positive. Now this one is asking for the absolute value of -4, but then on the outside here, you'll notice that there's an extra negative. So the absolute value symbol acts a lot like parentheses. So we would do what's inside that first and say, okay, what's the absolute value of -4? And we would say it's 4 units away from 0, but then this negative that's on the outside gets applied after the fact. So your answer here is -4 because of the one on the outside. Absolute value of 8, the number 8 is 8 units away from 0, still positive. 12 is 12 units away from 0. Now this one, absolute value of 15 is 15, but because of the negative on the outside, it is a -15. Now the parentheses are not absolute value. They're just saying the number that's in here, we're going to be the opposite of that number or the negative value of that number. So what's the opposite of 7? Another way to read this would be the opposite of 7 is -7. This one is a -3. Well, if we want the positive version, positives don't change anything. So this one is still worth -3. This is a -2, or the opposite of -2. Well, the negative would become positive. This one, positives don't change anything. So the positive version of +9 is still 9. And -4, or the opposite of -4, is +4. The two negatives cancel each other out. So now that we know all the basics, we can compare some numbers. We can always look back at the number line if we need to. We know that negative numbers are to the left of 0, and they are smaller than positive numbers, which are to the right of 0. So if you have one negative and one positive, the positive number is always going to be greater. Notice the big open section here, the open part of the symbol next to the 6, and we would read this as -7 is less than +6. We always read it from left to right. -7 is less than 6. 6 is the greater number because it's next to the greater part of the sign. Now, we're not going to try to do this one until we interpret the right-hand side, the absolute value of -10. What is the absolute value of -10? It's 10 away from 0. So 10 compared to -10, the 10 on the right is worth more. It's greater than the negative 10 that's on the left. 8 and 9, both positive. We know that 9 is greater than 8. Or we can say 8 is less than 9. You can read it either direction in order to figure out where the symbol goes. This one, absolute value of 3, well, that's 3 units away from 0 compared to negative 6. And positive values, always greater than negative values. Absolute value of negative 2, it is 2 away from 0. Absolute value of positive 2 is 2 away from 0. So these are actually equal. And so we can learn a short lesson from this. If you have a negative 2 and a positive 2, which are additive inverses, they're opposites, they're the same distance from 0, their absolute values are going to be equal. 5 compared to the absolute value of negative 4. Well, the absolute value of negative 4, it's 4 away from 0. So 5 is greater than 4. Negative 3 is 3 away from 0. 3 is greater than 1. Notice I never pick my greater than, less than, or equal to symbol until I have figured out what each one of these is worth. So the absolute value of 6 is 6 away from 0. Absolute value of negative 8 is 8 away from 0. And now I can compare 6 and 8. And so the 8 is the greater number. Negative 4 compared to negative 5. Now this is a little tricky when you start comparing negatives. Would you rather be $4 in debt or $5 in debt? Which is the better option of the two? Like, would you rather owe your brother $4 or would you rather owe your brother $5? Well, negative 4 is the better option. It's also closer to 0. So negative 4 is going to be the bigger number in this case. It's further to the right. So if you made yourself sort of mentally a quick little number line, you would notice that negative 4 is closer to the 0. It's further to the right. This is going to be your bigger number of the two. Negative 5, negative 2, same idea. Negative 2 further to the right, closer to 0. That's going to be our larger number. Negative 7 compared to negative 9. Negative 7 is further to the right on the number line, closer to 0. So that is our larger number. And here, the absolute value of negative 4 is 4. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. That's their distance from 0, making the 4 larger than the 3. Now, if we flip this over and take a look at the back, we are going to look at some phrases that also have to do with inequalities and figuring out, positive versus negative, and whether something is, in this case, a gain, a loss, different vocabulary words that have to do with positive and negative values. So first, we're going to read the directions. Circle the word or phrase noting a positive or negative value. Then write an integer that represents the situation. Okay, so let's start with circle the word or phrase noting a positive or negative value. 700 feet above sea level. Only one of those words has to do with something being positive or negative. Feet, that's neutral. Sea level is actually worth 0, but when we talk about above sea level, that tells us that something is positive. A loss of $55, the word loss tells us that this is a negative value. A gain of 10 yards, the word gain tells us that the 10 yards is a positive thing. A growth of 3 inches, all right? So growth is going to be positive. A drop of 7 degrees, the word drop tells us that it is a negative direction or a negative change. And a fall of 25 feet, that one is also going to tell us that it is negative. Well, now we've got to put that in with a number. So the first one was 700 feet above sea level. So above being positive, and 700 feet is what we're talking about. So 700 feet. And because it's positive, you'll notice I put no sign out here. Because if there is no sign, everybody knows that means it's positive. But when I go over here for a loss of $55, in order to tell people it's a loss and not a gain, I've got to put the negative sign. Dollar sign comes next, and the 55. Even though we say $55, don't forget that the dollar sign comes in front of the number. A gain of 10 yards. So 10 yards is the thing we're talking about. Since it's a gain, it's positive. We don't have to put any symbol in front of it. Everyone knows that no symbol means positive. A growth of 3 inches. So 3 inches, but since it's a growth positive, we don't put a symbol. A drop of 7 degrees. In order to let people know that it went down, we put the negative sign in front, 7 in the degree symbol. And last of this section, a fall of 25 feet. If something is falling, that is negative 25 feet. If there were no sign, then we would think it was somebody who had gone up 25 feet or gained 25 feet. And then we would put no sign there for a positive. Since this one's a fall and it's negative, we put the negative sign. Now, the rest of this section has to do with evaluating an expression. And basically, evaluate an expression means find the answer. So if I want to find the answer to 12 plus the absolute value of y, I have to look up in my question or up in my description and know that they're going to give me the value of the variable. So this y, 12 plus the absolute value of y is worth negative 3. And then I would evaluate my expression. Now, absolute value, that works a lot like parentheses. So the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Haven't used the 12 plus yet, so I copy it down, still have everything there. And then 12 plus 3 is 15. On the next one, x minus the absolute value of y, I've got to look back up here again and say, well, x is worth 4 minus absolute value, and y is worth negative 3. Your first line is called the substitution line. It's the first part of showing your work. 4 minus the absolute value of negative 3. I'm going to treat that like parentheses. 4 minus, and this is worth 3, since it's 3 away from 0. And 4 minus 3 is 1. This one's going to take a little bit of extra work because you'll notice this time it has more operations. 2 times the absolute value of 4 plus 3 times the absolute value of negative 3. Now, I know that's multiplication because they're bumped up against each other with no operation symbol in there. So 2 times absolute value of 4 is 4, plus 3 times the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Now, I can do these two multiplications in the same step because they are separated by addition. So this is going to be 8 plus 9, which is 17. Last but not least, this is a double again, but only one of them is an absolute value. So 3 times, and x is worth 4, minus 4 times, and I've got to make sure I've got the bars here for the y, which is negative 3. So I could also, if it's easier for you, you could put the dot there, and 4 minus the absolute value of negative 3. So that's another option if you want to use the dot instead of the parentheses, so you don't get the parentheses mixed up with the absolute value. 3 times 4, notice I did not do that multiplication yet because I still have an absolute value symbol over here, which acts like parentheses. Absolute value of negative 3 is 3. And then I've got 3 times 4, which is 12, minus 4 times 3, which is 12. And my answer is 0. So hopefully you're able to go back and rewatch portions of this if you need it. And don't forget to do the video check-in, which is a Kahoot this week. Thanks.